I've been at NXP for about 2.5 years and have been working quite a lot as I joined the company. Then right away it was pandemic. So there was a lot of work that we did relative to how we supported our employees through that. And what you'll hear about today is just my practical story of what that meant for our culture, how it began to shape our responses to that, our responses to COVID, our responses to hybrid, really began to take form in our culture. And so I hope to share that story. I'm the practical side, if you will, of the learning. Chris, my partner here, is from McKinsey, and he'll talk about, what's the research say and what are the learnings from other organizations say. So
I was going to introduce myself as the impractical side. Nice to meet you. I'm Chris Gagnon. I had kind of a weird career. I've had two 10-year stints at McKinsey with a 10 or 12 years of buying companies and private equity in between. I actually came back to McKinsey 10 years ago, not to be a management consultant, but to build our organization's solutions group, which is where we built all our tools around measuring culture and organization design and talent analytics. Of course, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. I ended up having to do some consulting, becoming the leader of our global organization practice, where I don't know whether to be proud of this or not, but I launched our diversity, equity, and inclusion service line. The reason I say I don't know if I should be proud of it is that we should have done it 10 years earlier. But so I will. My role is to share stories about what we're learning and measuring the world. So I'll try to seed some of Elsa's observations with that.
One of the things that we really discovered, and I was at a session earlier that talked about all the data coming out from the pandemic, and all of us are learning through this, right? No one has the answer. There's no crystal ball. We're all learning on how to navigate through all of this. But at NXP, our learning was just, who are we? How do we respond to this? And so first I say that at our company, there was 3 shifts that happened during the last 2 years. The first shift was, it's a global pandemic. How do we react to that? We had 30,000 people across the world, and different countries were at different stages. There was different rules. There was different levels of the pandemic. But it really became a safety. Let's protect our employees. I called that at NXP our first shift, and that really went for a lot of 2020. But as we were coming out of 2020, we all went home, notwithstanding our manufacturing, we all went home. We figured out how to work. We figured out Teams. We figured out our calendars. And we were relatively safe. We were really proud that we were very safe and that employees were trusting what we were doing. Then came the second shift, which was a lot of 2021. And that second shift was, maybe we figured out how to do all this, but our mental well-being wasn't what we thought it would be. There was a lot of pressure. Working mothers particularly, or parents that had children, really were having a difficult time navigating through that. We had hired, I want to say, about 3,000 people in that year, and all of them onboarded virtually. So there was that. And again, I think people just became more conscientious of, this needs to be worth it to me. I need to love where I'm working because it's so hard. So we shifted out of safety, if you will, into how are we taking care of our employees? What are we doing from a caring point of view? And the research, and McKinsey had some of it, says characteristics of leaders now do include empathy, which is newer, I think, for a lot of us in this field. Caring became more prominent. This whole idea of flexibility, of course, was paramount. But we really navigated to 2021 with putting, if you will, the face of the employee and their well-being first. So that was our second shift. Then we came to realize, well, this is not going away. It was when the vaccine first came out, if you all remember, there was such high hope. And listen, I was super glad to get my vaccine, but it didn't make the pandemic go away. I think a lot of us thought, well, now with the vaccine, we'll all return to the office, but it just didn't play out that way. In fact, there were some regions for us. India got hit so hard with the Delta virus. I would say 2021 was worse because we did lose 9 employees, 7 in India and 2 in Malaysia. And it was really difficult for NXP as that was happening. And so well-being just became very, very prominent. And then we said, well, we have to figure out how to be in this new environment. So we call that NXP Next. And what we mean by that is we're taking what we've learned in the last 2 years relative to empathy, relative to flexibility, and we're putting that forward relative to diversity, relative to how we think about our company, our purpose, our culture. So as a result of that, we've embarked on working on our purpose. We're working with the CEO and his team to shape the values. So we've had now updated values, refreshed values, a refreshed purpose, and now we're working on behaviors and what that is. So I don't think that when this all began with the pandemic that we thought we would be doing purpose, value, and behavior work, but here we are at NXP as part of our way forward. We are doing that. And so it's really been, exciting, actually. It's really been exciting to be able to have those conversations with the organization. So that's a little bit about the NXP story in our last couple of years. And Chris, maybe I'll give to you so that you can add any of your insights on those topics.
You started really by referring to purpose, and so many things drive from there. I'd like to make a couple of observations about the purpose discussions we're seeing. One is, for a long time, I sat in discussions like these, and we talked about what the world would look like after the pandemic as though that were a singular question. And I used to answer it that way, and I now think I was 100% wrong, that the first level answer should be the world after the pandemic will be increasingly bifurcated. When I joined the work world, right, being an average industry performer was a relatively profitable thing to do. Today it is completely useless. All the profits in the world are made by the top 20% of companies in every industry. And if you look at how those companies run themselves, more often than not, they are the ones making really radical experiments in how they run themselves. They're doing things dramatically different. So, one rather depressing answer is at many companies, the world will end up looking a lot like it used to, and they won't do particularly well. Those that tackle it, though, have a real tough challenge. I promise I am old enough that I have heard people say with a straight face, Chris, the purpose of a corporation is to maximize shareholder value, period. Right? You couldn't say that today and not get laughed out of a room. Right? All right, well, what is it beyond that? Well, it must include serving customers well, being a good member of society, being fair, equitable, and compassionate to our employees. It must include a lot of things, all of which I'm hugely in favor of and have no idea how to trade off against each other. We don't have a language for balanced scorecards and trade-offs. And I was listening to somebody last night talking about it was Frontier Communications. They were talking about running fiber. And you could run fiber this way, right? Or you could move it over 3 blocks, right? If you move it over 3 blocks, you create access to a bunch of underserved neighborhoods. Project ROI goes down. Should you do it? I don't know. How much does the project ROI go down? How much am I willing to let it go down? But this first basic discussion of what are our goals and our purpose is one that I think is going to start differentiating the winners and losers, in part because it differentiates who wants to work for you.
Yeah, I think that, and I'm sure you all see this in your organizations too. I think that the question of how was culture impacted by the pandemic is a very prominent question, because maybe there were some surprises, maybe there weren't surprises, but I think there was a lot of learning at the organizational level. I think there was learning at the person level. about what you would do in a situation like, are you an advocate for hybrid? Are you an advocate for flexibility? How do you really bring in inclusivity in a world that's being bifurcated, or in a world where you see examples again and again relative to how do we treat that person or the other person. So again, an unexpected, at least for us, I don't think that we figured we were going to begin a journey of culture. I didn't think we figured we were going to begin a journey of values and behaviors, but all of those questions as they were coming up just presented themselves very large to the executive team, and then how the executive team was cascading messages relative to what do we want our company to be. The inclusivity piece became also very prominent. I mean, just even okay, well, now we're all remote, so do we all engage the same way? And it was really enlightening, I think, for a lot of people who never were remote and were always in the conference room, and now you go, oh, well, that's what that feels like. Maybe I'm changing how I think about people who do work remotely, or how I, as an organization, make sure that I include everyone. So again, small examples, I think, that just sort of beg the question of how do we want to shape ourselves and our culture. So again, we just saw many examples come up like that. I mean, we have a large manufacturing group of employees. We have about 11,000, 12,000 people that are in fabs. Some here in Austin. We have a couple of fabs, front-end fabs here. We have some in Nijmegen, Netherlands. We have China, Malaysia, Taiwan. And so every time we talked about, oh, well, you can be flexible. Well, how do we talk about that with, our core employees who make it happen at the end of the day? So again, we had a lot of, it seemed like every day posed this small question that ended up being really large for us. So a little bit of our learning was this adaptability, this flexibility, and you see it there on the screen. It's how do we coach? How do we care? How do we remain flexible? And I think that agility on how to do all of that became very, very important. And I think our executive team began to realize, wow, we've got to really think differently about what our values are and what our behaviors are. So again, back to that work. Maybe what I can do is ask you all how you all have reacted to the pandemic. Are there any changes you've had with your culture, with purpose or values or any of that work?
Mimi Marziani, I run the Texas Civil Rights Project, and we are a way smaller company. We hang out around 40 employees and usually hundreds of volunteers on top of that. One thing that we've done differently that I'm really proud of, and I myself have always, I'm an extrovert, I'm a relational person. I've always been really proud of the fact that I've traveled around our offices and it's small enough that I know quite a bit about every single person who works at our organization all the time. And then, just from a personal level, that had to shift dramatically with the pandemic, and in getting lots of feedback from staff. We also have intentional structures to have power sharing across the organization. One thing that came out was that, people really wanted even more transparency into decision making across, you name it. It doesn't, big or small. They wanted to know why, who was involved, what information was taken into account. And so we've long invested in our leadership team as managers, as leaders. And one thing that we have put into place in the last 6 months is a new leadership team charter that actually standardizes our meetings. We now have, they're scheduled out for the whole year. We meet twice a quarter, and there is an opportunity for staff to shape the meeting agenda and to show up and be part of the first part of the meeting. We didn't want it to be the full part because we didn't want to chill, robust discussion. And that has been really, really important, I think, for us to we've always talked about being a place that's transparent and really believes in being inclusive and having shared power. And this has been a really important, concrete example. Everyone's like, oh, right, I can show up to that meeting and I can put something on the agenda and I can present to the leadership team and I know that it's going to get, heard and registered.
Transparency for us became a huge issue as well. I think you're absolutely right that what the pandemic did, it created so much ambiguity, and ambiguity tucked into fear at that. So it was really difficult, and I agree that transparency just became more important and more important. And so there were a lot more communication opportunities that we found that honestly, I'm not sure that would have happened had it not been for that. But I do think that transparency sort of got elevated relative to what were some of the behaviors that we needed to be, as an executive team putting out there for the organization. Because that first phase that I talked about, where it was protect and safety, it was, but what are we doing and where are we going back, and do we need to be vaccinated, and how do we tackle this, and can, I work from home all the time. It was just a ton of questions. During some of this, again, I call it, I don't know, the great reveal, as there were layers of the pandemic revealing themselves, and then how you reacted to that. I know some of the research that McKinsey did was, employers or executive teams think that you want well-being in more of a traditional sense, wellness. Remember when we used to talk about that maybe 10 years ago? It was different than what it is today. Today it is more mental health. And we didn't used to talk about mental health really ever. And I think what this pandemic has done, it has allowed us to have that conversation. I think that over time, they themselves began to have experiences at their home with their spouse, or they had experiences at their home with their kids and school and whatnot, that I think it became a situation where they were almost enveloped in it, and it was almost hard not to react. And I think now, though, that's created that flexibility even in the executive team, where they know, well, things are so dynamic, that if we think that's some research that can help us, we're going to go and do that. They hadn't been ready, actually, the team. The pandemic was going on. We had broached should we have a purpose renewal? Should we have a purpose conversation? And they didn't feel the timing was right. But then again, as the pandemic evolved and all these layers started to reveal themselves, it became a more organic way of thinking of, what? We have made some decisions that are newer for us, that are flexing different muscles for us, and we like that we are more people-centric, and therefore, yeah, it is the right time to talk about it. In a conversation I was having with our CEO, he said, maybe we're too late. And I said, no, I don't think so. Had we started the values conversation, the purpose conversation a year ago, people might have said, well, why are we talking about this? I feel unsafe. Let's first talk about a vaccine situation. And so I think the timing says a lot about where we are on this journey, all of us. I don't think that's unique to NXP. I think that all of us are in this journey where we've learned through the biggest social experiment any of us will probably ever live through. And what do we learn from that? And what do we say, hey, that's a norm we don't want to pull forward, but what are some norms we did learn that we do want to move forward with? And so that's been actually oddly a really great learning through all of this. So I don't know if, again, other sharing or Chris, you have any insight from some of the clients you work with, whether they're seeing that same evolution and how they're reacting to the learning as well.
Two related observations. If we go back to winners and losers, one of the things you notice about the winners is they don't run their businesses like normal companies or each other. If you go visit, let's take Amazon and Apple as two places that have performed extraordinarily well. They're not anything like each other. They're also not anything like most places. You go visit them, it's a very, very weird, strange situation. And the reason I bring that up is We know around the hybrid flexibility thing, well, first, let's recognize we're talking about 20% of the workforce, right? The security agents and ticket folks at the airport have been going to work, right? They haven't been able to phone it in on Zoom, right? People who work in factories. So, but for the 20% of office and knowledge workers for whom this is a huge idea, I would posit to you that they are not going back to the office no longer as much as they were, not because of the pandemic, but because they don't want to, right? They've decided, right? This is very clear preference. If that's the case, let me submit to you that the old system that didn't work in real life of a full calendar of badly run meetings will not work well on Zoom, right? And so that's what, like, if we take, I picked Amazon and Apple for a reason. Amazon went after how you run meetings, right? Outlawed PowerPoint. They didn't really, but they pretend they did. But they run their meetings differently than we do, right? Apple went after meetings. You're not allowed to have scheduled multi-person meetings at Apple any day other than Friday. Those are radical changes, but I would submit to you that radical changes are required as opposed to saying, how are we going to make the new world look as much like possible as the old world, but somehow all get more balanced.
That's another example of how we're rewiring everything almost, because also at NXP we said, let's try not to have meetings on Friday. Let's schedule, instead of 60-minute meetings, 55-minute meetings, so that people have literally 5 minutes between the back-to-back for bio breaks. I mean, that's a little crazy, but that's what was happening. But I think all of us are rethinking, how is it that we show up at work, figuratively, literally? You know, is it more productive to give people a day where they just sort of cool down on the meetings? We've just started, we're going to implement recharge days. And I know in talking to some of my peers, they're doing something similar, a global PTO day, a recharge somebody else's. I mean, it's just kind of a day where the company says either take a day off, and if you can't take a day off, don't have any meetings. And we're imposing that, if you will, back to the well-being, back to the balance, because it's almost like a machine, right, that gets going, and it's almost hard to stop that machine without an intervention of some type. But I think the meeting structure, again, one of those things that are you don't think about it first. I mean, who was thinking meeting structure with the pandemic? But that's another way that I think we're learning how it's affecting our culture and how we can be better.
Another trend that comes out of the data on this topic that I'd like to throw out for discussion is companies shifting from moving the discussion from when to why. Yes. Right? I mean, let's assume people are smart, right? And if they say they don't want to come back in, they're right. Right? We hire smart adults, right? It must be because there's a lot of things they do that have no benefit of being in the office. But there are some things